Good morning. Barry Bryson here. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. We're continuing our study of Paul's co-workers, and we're going to finish up talking about Priscilla and Aquila today. When we were together last time, we talked about Priscilla and Aquila. We meet them in Acts chapter 18 in Corinth, where Paul meets them. Aquila is a Jewish man who is a tent maker, highly skilled, from Pontus, which is on the coast of the Black Sea, the north coast of Turkey. And Priscilla, evidently Roman, and that family name Prisca, is one of the noble families of Rome, one of the ancient families of Rome, and she's evidently a member of that family, or she wouldn't be carrying that name. And we saw them become Paul's colleagues, co-workers, and then almost immediately his advance team, because he sends them to Ephesus before he goes to Ephesus. And today he'll send them back to Ephesus. But we see them in Rome before he gets to Rome as well. So they seem to be an advance team for the Apostle Paul. They go someplace before he gets there. And they're there waiting for him. That worked really well when he showed up in Corinth. And he could just live with them and work as a tent maker because Aquila had already established himself as a tent maker in the town. And so it makes sense that he would repeat that since it worked so well in Corinth. We mentioned the references that we have about Priscilla and Aquila in the book of Acts. But I want to read something that he says about them today in Romans and then in 2 Timothy. So this is towards the end of Paul's life, both these letters. 2 Timothy is written very close to his death. And Romans, at the end of the book of Acts, Paul's under house arrest in Rome, and he's going to make his defense before Caesar. It seems, and we'll see this as we study the life of Silas and the life of Timothy, it seems that he was released and that he was able to, after that, and that he was able then to preach some more before being arrested again after the burning of Rome. So at that point, the Romans have recognized that Christians are not Jews. Judaism is a protected religion in the Roman Empire. It's an ancient and indigenous religion, and therefore Jews have the right to practice it and to not be restricted from practicing it in their homeland by law. And as long as the Romans thought Christians were just a branch of Judaism, they provided due process and protected Christians, which they do throughout the book of Acts. And that's the situation we're in at the end of the book of Acts. But when they realized that Christians were not Jews at all, but another religion, that's when the persecution really started. And Nero was the first to single Christians out for empire-wide persecution, and because he blamed them after the burning of Rome for setting the fire, which Tacitus tells us no one believed that happened, but nobody liked Christians anyway. And nobody really rose up in their defense. That's in the annals of Tacitus. That would explain why Priscilla and Aquila, Christians, get kicked out of Rome with the rest of the Jews during the anti-Christian riots, or in the wake of the anti-Christian riots that were happening in Rome, and while we find them in Corinth. So at the end of Paul's life, and this seems to be written between those two incarcerations, if I'm reading the text correctly, that he's writing the book of Romans, and he plans to be there soon, and he wants them to help him get to Spain, where he wants to start a work in Spain, which he details in chapter 15. Anyway, he says in chapter 3, in this long list of hellos, and it's amazing how many people Paul already knows in Rome, although he's never been there. He knows so many people. He's got relatives there who are Christians, friends, co-workers who are Christians. And the first ones that he mentions are Priscilla and Aquila. So they're there ahead of him. Greet Prisca and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus, who, for my life, risked their own necks, to whom not only do I give thanks, but also all the churches. Also greet the church that is in their house. So they've hosted a church in their house. Most congregations were house churches in the first century, and wherever they are, they're hosting a church in their house, which we're going to read again in a minute from 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 19. But they're on the top of his list, and so he wants to establish their connection and how important they are to all believers. He calls Priscilla Prisca, her family name. Priscilla seems to be a nickname, a diminutive of affection. You know, little Prisca. Not that she was necessarily short, but that would, you know, that's that would be a term of endearment and affection. Well, her name is probably Prisca, the family name, and so he greets her by that name. She comes first again. My colleagues, my fellow workers, he thinks of them as peers, not as employees, and he says they risk their own necks. That's important. Risk their necks. That's how he's going to die. Because you could not crucify a Roman citizen. You could only behead them. And that tells us that they were both Roman citizens, the way he was a Roman citizen. And that they were willing to put their own lives on the line. I just love that they're always together, you know. Priscilla and Aquila. They were a team. And equal partners in this collaboration. And willing to do whatever they needed to do. We see them when we left them last time, taking Apollos aside to correct his teaching. It wasn't because they were timid. These are people willing to die for the cause of the gospel of Jesus Christ. But because, like Barnabas, they were encouragers and builders up, not tearers down. And they accomplished, you know, a great deal of success, as they did with Apollos, who immediately embraced the truth that they shared with him and went off to preach it and became one of Paul's key people. The last time we have mention of Priscilla and Aquila is in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse 9, 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 19. Paul is writing this after he's already faced wild beasts. This is imminent. His death is imminent, and he wants Timothy to be with him when it happens. And that's what he's writing 2 Timothy about. And he's also worried about Timothy's faith, which we will talk about when we talk about Timothy in just a couple of days. And Timothy is the preacher at Ephesus at this time, which we'll also talk about when we talk about Timothy in a few days. But at the end of the letter, when he said, I need you to come, and I need you to come before winter, which he says in verse 21, he says, greet Priscilla and Aquila and the household of Onesiphorus. Priscilla and Aquila are there in Ephesus. He's leaving this church in good hands because in the same way that Timothy, and we'll talk about, was his troubleshooter, Priscilla and Aquila seem to be his advance team. And he's confident in asking Timothy to leave that work and to come be with him because Priscilla and Aquila are there. And man, I can't wait to meet him someday. I really can't wait to meet these guys someday and get to know who they are. And I look forward to that in heaven one day. I hope you are too. Well, we're going to talk about Silas next. So thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes, and we'll pick up with Silas next time.